Okay, so sometimes the number of features extracted is very large and your data is very less. So it's an advantageous to represent them in some kind of a low number of features. Okay, so that's one such technique which we're going to see is the dimension reduction by using the principal component analysis. Okay, which is specifically it's a feature engineering where the features which are extracted you will be reducing them into the smaller representation. Okay, and at the same time that can be given to any of the classifiers. So one of the popular classifier is the support vector machine. I'll try to cover this support vector machine, giving the essential technical background associated with that. Okay, so with this, if you go further, so let us try to see that okay, why we need the dimension reduction is needed. Okay, and what do you mean by the dimension reduction? What I'm talking about. Okay, so for example, they consider the classification of the tissues in which there are several cells which could be normal or abnormal cases. Okay, in such scenario, so usually, so first thing is that before we give it to any of the classifier or building the classifiers, we extract the features. Okay, when we extract the features, suppose for example in this case of the example, so from each of the images with respect to the different categories, so I'm extracting a d number of features. That's what you are seeing here with respect to the x1 to xd, d number of features you are seeing. And this d number of features, I can represent them as a each values in my vector. Okay, so I am representing this as a feature vector. Vector is having the d number of values. Okay, in other words, I can say that an image is now represented as a d-dimensional feature vector. Okay, usually this is the scenario. First, you extract the feature, you give a representation in terms of the data vector, and each vector is of the some, say for example, is the d-dimensional vector. D is the notation I'm using it for the dimension here or the number of features, and then that will be given to the classification task for the building the classification model. Okay, this feature representation, especially the number of dimensions. So in other words, we can say that this image now, when it is represented as a d-dimensional feature vector, it can be seen as a point in that, an image is a point in that d-dimensional feature vector or d-dimensional space. Okay, so that is the overall understanding comes here. Okay, so now, so when we have the d-dimensional features, okay, so these d-dimensional features play a very important role in building the classifiers. Because when we build the classifier, okay, so we need to learn the model, and these learned models, we need to learn the parameters associated with your classification model. And these parameters, number of parameters to be estimated for any of the classifiers, it could be neural network or the support vector machine or any other classifiers. So it depends upon what is the dimension of your data. Okay, if the number of dimension, if the dimension of the data is very large, and then it is necessary that a large number of examples is needed in order to efficiently learn the parameters for the classification model. Okay, so many of the cases, specifically in the physiological systems or in the medical domain, the number of data points or the images or whatever the case it is, so it is very less. Okay, so it is very essential that we need to build a robust system so that should perform the decisions or the help the making the decisions in the medical domain. Okay, if that is the scenario, so it's very much important to build a robust system. In order to build a robust system, so we need to estimate the parameters of the classifiers very well. But the important thing is that, so that directly depends upon the dimension of your data. If the dimensionality of the data is very large, then it's difficult to build the proper model. So at that scenario, so there's a need of, the mechanism is needed to get the reduced dimensional representation of the original data such that the new representation, which is a reduced dimensional representation, it should include all the information content of the original data itself. That means that the representation should be close to the original representation. Okay, so this is the need for going for the dimensional reduction. So here there is a one thing, that subtle thing I just wanted to make a differentiation here. Suppose you have the d number of features. If you select some subset of the features, that's what is called as the feature selection. Okay, so your feature values are not going to be changed, but you are selecting only the subset of feature. That's what is feature selection is considered. We are not talking anything about that. What we are talking about is the dimension reduction. It's nothing but we are my original data, if you see in this particular figure here, so my original data, it is represented as a d-dimensional feature vector. I'm doing some mechanism with which I'll transform this d-dimensional representation to L-dimensional representation. It's a feature transformation. Keep this in mind. This feature transformation, what we're talking about is dimension reduction, such that the new representation we are representing as L-dimensional representation, this L is much smaller than the D. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about, the dimension reduction. This dimension reduction is very much different than the feature selection algorithm. This dimension reduction is usually called as a feature selection, feature transformation. Okay, so we are transforming from the large dimensional representation to the small dimensional representation. Okay, the transformation could be either using the linear transformation or by the non-linear transformation. Okay, so that is a very much important. Hope this subtle thing is clear for all of you, right? So please stop me if you have any doubt in this case. Okay, I'll continue now. All right. Okay, so now when we're doing this feature transformation, so from the large dimension, higher dimensional to the lower dimension cases, it is quite possible that what is the new representation we are getting it, we can also call it as a compressed representation. This compressed representation sometimes may consist all the information without having any loss. In that situation, that kind of a data reduction, we call it as a lossless reduction. But in most of the cases, when we transform this to the lower dimension representation, we can't reconstruct the data or from this compressed representation as equal to that of the original representation. But what we can reconstruct is only the approximated version of that. So, and that is the reason why we call such kind of a data reduction is called as a lossy data reduction. The principal component analysis is one such technique used for feature transformation to get the reduced dimension representation, and this follows what we call it as a lossy dimension reduction technique. Okay, so that is what we're going to see in first 20-25 minutes about this dimension reduction is concerned. Okay, so as a result, from the d-dimensional feature representation, we'll be transforming to the L-dimensional representation, where L is much smaller than the number of dimensions having the original representation. Okay, is it clear so far? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yes, all right. Sir. Okay, so let's move forward. Let us try to see what is involved in principal component analysis. What I'll try to do here is that I'll try to give the general concept, what we are trying to look in this principal component analysis as a technique is concerned with, and how exactly we are doing it. I'll go after that. Okay, so suppose that now I have the training data. Okay, there are n training examples are associated with me, and all these training examples are having the d-dimensional representation. Okay, so what we do in the principal component analysis is that, okay, so we're trying to look. So look at this. I'm just looking and briefly giving you some overview of the higher level overview of in the vector algebra itself. So when we are having the d-dimensional representation, okay, that means that I'm talking about the d-dimensional space. Okay, in that d-dimensional space, there will be some vectors. Okay, there will be d number of vectors. Say I'm representing as a qi. Okay, these vectors are orthonormal to each other. Okay, and these, when we say a particular vector is an orthonormal, or it's by definition this is there. If you take any d-dimensional d-dimensional space, so there are some d number of vectors that do exist there. They are orthonormal to each other. Okay, and these orthonormal vectors are usually the unit vector in the direction of that particular data. Okay, and these d-dimensional orthonormal vectors, so they are said to be orthonormal because when the inner product operation between the two different dimensions of these unit vectors, so that gives you the inner product operation gives you 0, or the inner product operation between the same vector, unit vector onto itself is going to give you the 1. Okay, when such property satisfies on this D number of unit vectors, they are called said to be the orthonormal to each other. They're nothing but they are perpendicular to each other. Okay, so the Qi transpose Qj is nothing but the two different vectors. They are, that inner product operation equal to 0 means their cosine similarity is 0. That nothing but they are perpendicular to each other. That's the one thing. And Qi transpose Qi is equal to 1 means they are collinear on them. So that is the representation. Okay, so if you take any of the d-dimensional vector or d-dimensional space, so there are such vectors, they are orthonormal to each other. Okay, that is important. Okay, why that is needed? Because in PCA we are trying to look for such orthonormal vectors. Okay, and these orthonormal vectors are called as the direction of projection. Okay, and we select out of D, we select L number of orthonormal vectors, and what we do in PCA is that we try to project my data vector onto the data vector is the d-dimensional vector onto this L projection vectors so that I can get the principal components. Okay, when I project them onto this L orthonormal vectors, I'll get a L values and they forms the L dimensional vector. Okay, that's what I'm trying to do here, where ith unit the basis vector, when I project my data vector onto this ith basis vector, I'm get a scalar value. Basically, that is nothing but the principal component. What is the meaning of this inner product operation? Basically it is the projection of my data vector x onto the projection vector Qi, and the what is the AI? It is basically the length of that projection. Okay, so that is what is we are getting there. Okay, like that, when I do this projection of this data vector onto the L number of the projection vectors, what I'm going to get is the L number of principal components, and these L number of principal components forms the L dimensional vector. Okay, this is what the transformation I'm going to get, that from my original representation, d-dimensional representation xn is projected to the L number of L dimensional vector. If you really look into this projection, it's a linear transformation here. So the transformation, what I'm trying to do here is only the linear transformation. Okay, so this is the basic idea in the principal component analysis. Now the question arises here, so how do you define, how do you identify these basis vectors? Okay, that's the first question to be addressed. The second question is that how do you choose the number of how do you, out of D numbers, how do you choose which L directions to be considered? Okay, these are the two questions to be addressed. If you answer this question, that is the idea of the principal component analysis. So most importantly, the important goal of the principal component analysis is that once I do the transformation from the D-dimensional to the L dimension, what I expect is that the new representation in the L dimension representation, okay, that has the almost maximum information content of the original representation is preserved. That is the most important. Okay, that is what we are trying to do that. Okay, so now let us try to see that. So basically, so now when I say that I'm able to the transformation should be guaranteed that the new representation contains information. I should be in a position to reconstruct my original data from that transformed data, transformed reduced representation data. Okay, so how I can do that? I can do this by the linear combination of this direction of the projection Qi and the principal components like this. The linear combination of the principal component with respect to their corresponding this projection vector, and this linear sum of this is going to give me back the approximation of the original data vector. Why I call the approximation of original vector? Because original representation is d-dimensional, but the approximation of the xn cap, which is I'm getting, it's derived from it's reconstructed from the reduced representation or the compressed representation. Okay, that is important. Okay, what is important, if you do the Euclidean distance between this original representation xn and the approximated representation, so you are going to get what is the error of this reconstruction. Okay, the goal of the principal component analysis is that select those L projection vectors such that this reconstruction error should be as minimum as possible. That is the major goal. Okay. In other words, in other words, it says that the new representation is obtained by projecting onto the L directions will consist of the maximum information content of the original data. So that is the important thing. Okay. Is it clear? So with this, let us try to see that, to try to address those two questions. Okay, how do you choose? How do you identify which are the orthonormal vectors for the projection? And then how do you decide which L direction to be considered? These are the two things to be answered. Okay, so that is what we try to see with respect to what is the basic procedure for this PCA is done. Okay, so now what will be given to us is the N training examples. Okay, each example is a d-dimensional vector. Okay, we try to, in order to bring it to the uniform thing, so we try to we subtract the mean of all the samples. Okay, the mean subtracted representation. Okay, once we have the mean subtracted representation, the capital X, what I'm considering here. So this is the data matrix where each row indicating one sample and each column indicating the number of dimensions it is having or number of features it is having there. Okay, and what I'm trying to do here is that once I'm having this data matrix, I'm trying to, it is this data matrix of the form of the size n cross d, where n is the number of rows, number of training examples, and the d is the number of dimension of each of those training examples. Okay, so now when you perform this correlation matrix, computing this correlation matrix, so that is the X transpose X, this is a matrix here. That is, when I do this, what I'm going to get is the correlation matrix C as a D cross D matrix. Okay, hope you're all following this. Okay, this correlation matrix, okay, it is basically a symmetric matrix because it's a correlation we are getting over there. Okay, and this matrix, we perform a eigen analysis on this correlation matrix. The correlation is a square matrix, D cross D matrix, and it's a when I do this eigen analysis on this correlation matrix C, okay, so what I'm going to get is the D eigenvalues. That's a lambda is indicating the D eigenvalues, and then D number of eigenvectors corresponding to those eigenvalues. Okay, so the important information that's present here is that this correlation matrix C, it is a symmetric matrix. Okay, so when you perform the eigen analysis on this symmetric matrix, usually you are going to get the non-negative eigenvalues. Okay, and when you get the non-negative eigenvalues, the eigenvectors corresponding to them is basically they are the unit vectors. Okay, so nothing but the eigenvectors. By definition, I'm not going in the deep of the mathematics, but I'm just giving you the definition itself. When you perform this eigen analysis on the symmetric matrix, so the eigenvalues are distinctive and non-negative, and the eigenvectors are the eigenvectors corresponding to each of the eigenvalues. They are the orthonormal vectors. Is that clear for you? So this is what the first answer is going to come. Okay, how do you select the orthonormal vectors? So we computed the eigen analysis on the correlation matrix, okay, and which gives the eigenvectors. So these eigenvectors are orthonormal vectors. Okay, so since they are orthonormal vectors, they are nothing but the unit vectors, and they are the direction of projections now. And on these orthonormal vectors, nothing but this eigenvectors, so we perform the inner product operation, or we perform the projection of my input data onto this eigenvectors. Okay, so that is what I'm going to do that. And most importantly, another thing is that each eigenvalues indicate the variance or the length of or the strength of those eigenvectors. That means that if an eigenvalue is having the large value, that means that its corresponding eigenvector consists, it is the direction having the maximum information content of that particular data. Okay, that is the meaning of that. Is it clear? Let me repeat that. If an eigenvalue is having the larger value and corresponding eigenvector is the direction having the larger eigen. Okay, so now next thing is to, now I have the from the d-dimensional space, I have the d orthonormal vectors are there. Now I need to select L orthonormal vectors for my projection. Okay, which L has to be chosen? So this L vectors which I select such that these vectors consist of the maximum information content of the data, original data. Okay, so which item is going to give me the maximum information content? The corresponding eigenvalues. Okay, what we're going to do is that we select L out of D orthonormal basis vector, that's nothing but the eigenvectors, okay, which consists of the high variance in the data. That means that we select those L orthonormal vectors for which their corresponding eigenvalues are significantly large. Okay, what we do basically, we rank order these eigenvalues in their descending order. We select leading L eigenvalues having the larger eigenvalues, okay, and corresponding eigenvectors are my direction of projections on which I will be trying to project on. Okay, this is what I'm trying to do that. Okay, so now the second question also is solved. Okay, how do you choose the L direction is concerned? Okay, now one thing is still not clear right now. How do you decide which L has to be? How do you decide what is the actual value for L? That will come later. So it is empirically it can be done. I'll show you that what is the one thumb rule one can use it for do that in later cases. Okay, now what we'll do, once we select the L directions or the eigenvectors, we project my data vector X onto each of those L vectors to get my principal components, which results in the L orthonormal L dimensional vectors. So that's how my original representation Xn is now represented as the L dimensional vector. Okay. Now, since I consider those L directions which having the maximum variance is having there, that means the maximum information contents are holding there. The transformed vector A, what I'm getting here, so that consists of the maximum information content. Okay, that is what is being guaranteed. Okay, so now, so that's why we are saying that the eigenvalue which corresponds to variance of the projected data. Okay, that is larger the value of eigenvalues, the corresponding eigenvectors having the maximum content of the information. That is the idea we are used here. Okay, so now how do you justify that? Okay, so now when you reconstruct this L dimensional vector, okay, what you're going to get the approximated representation. Okay, and this approximation representation, when the error is computed with respect to the original representation, this error should be very minimal. Okay, that is the important. Okay, so basically, what did I cover so far? Basically, the PCA as a dimension reduction operation, the technique where from the d-dimensional representation we try to find the d orthonormal basis vector which is obtained as the what is that? It's obtained as the eigenvectors of the correlation matrix. Okay, and these eigenvectors, when the data is projected onto this L number of eigenvectors, which is corresponding to the leading eigenvalues, so the reduced representation what we get is the new representation, which consists of only the actual information content that's existing over there. Okay, so it's important that if you instead of taking the eigenvectors corresponding to the leading eigenvalues, if you consider the eigenvectors corresponding to the least eigenvalues, okay, then these directions consist of only the noise. No information content will be there. And when you reconstruct the data, so you're going to see only the noise, not the information content. Okay, just I will show you that with an example how actually it is the case. Okay, say for example, the same microscopic images for the tissues, if I consider that, I have around 200 such images I have taken. Each image is of the size around 100 cross 100. Okay, when I represent this as a d-dimensional representation, usually one of the representation what we do is that we take this 100 cross 100 image and then we linearize them. That means that when you linearize them, so it will become a data vector. So now the 100 cross 100 image, when it is linearized, so it becomes a 10,000 dimensional vector. It's a huge number of dimensions. I wanted to apply a PCA on here. Okay, what I did, I computed from these 200 examples. Okay, so I computed the correlation matrix. Okay, which is of the dimension 10,000 cross 10,000, and then apply the principal component and I apply the I perform the eigen analysis. As a result, I got 10,000 eigenvalues and the 10,000 corresponding eigen vectors. Okay, so now if I plot these eigenvalues, what you're going to see here is that x-axis is the number of eigenvalues. So there are 10,000 eigenvalues are there. If you see that very few number of eigenvalues are having a very large value, rest of all of them are the very small. This is a clue for us that where the number of eigenvalues are very small, those eigenvalues that needs to be discarded. In other words, the eigenvectors corresponding to those eigenvalues that needs to be discarded. Let me just zoom this out and then let me just plot only the leading 100 eigenvalues. If you really see that out of the 100 leading eigenvalues, you can see that roughly 40 to 50 number of eigenvalues have the large number of values. Rest of all of them has the very small values. Okay, so that means that those eigenvectors corresponding to them doesn't having this significant information content over there. If you ignore them, it doesn't going to affect much. Okay, let me just show you this thing by performing the reconstruction of the images. Let's consider that this is my original image. Okay, I performed the PCA, and then what I did is that I consider only the leading eigenvalue, single eigenvalue, and then corresponding eigenvector I considered. Okay, and I projected all this data, this particular data vector onto that, and then I try to reconstruct this. What you're going to see here is that this is after projecting onto the single direction, that direction having the maximum eigenvalue. Now the data representation is the single data representation I'm having there. And if I reconstruct them, you're not going to see anything there. Okay, so that means that the considering only one direction with the corresponding to the maximum value of eigenvalue, it is not sufficient. We need to consider more number of eigenvalues. Okay, what I did is that I consider the leading 10 eigenvalues, and then I considered their corresponding eigenvectors, and then projected that, and then they reconstructed the data. So you can see that the data still doesn't have much of the information. One thing I just wanted to say here is that though the original image is of the color image, so what I did is that for the reconstruction, I just considered for the simplicity cases, I just considered only the grayscale of that. Okay, so in principle, you have to consider for each of the color spaces, but I'm just for the simplicity cases, I consider only single color space. Okay, now when I increase the number of eigenvectors, you can see that you can start seeing the information content over there. Okay, when the number of when L is equal to 40, that means that when I reduce the dimension to the 40 dimension, that means considering the 40 leading eigenvectors, okay, you can see that almost all the information contents are still preserved in the reconstructed image. Remember that my total number of eigenvectors are 10,000. Out of the 10,000, I consider only the 40 eigenvectors corresponding to the leading eigenvalues. When I reconstructed the data after projecting onto those directions, so you can see that the data is almost complete information has been preserved. Okay, that means that when I didn't given the reconstruction error, but the reconstruction error is observed to be very small here. And the same thing is observed when I consider the first 100 eigenvectors or the 200 eigenvectors, still the similar information is preserved. Okay, so this is the beauty of the dimension reduction. Okay, basically when we do the dimension reduction using the PCA, basically what we ensure is that when you choose the L number of L directions corresponding to the leading eigenvalues, okay, they ensures that the maximum information content is preserved, and that is what has been illustrated in this figure also. Hope you are understood this, right? Just to summarize this principal component analysis, so basically it is one of the dimension reduction technique. Basically, we perform the feature transformation by projecting the data onto the basis vectors corresponding to the leading eigenvalues. Okay, these eigenvalues, leading eigenvalues, corresponds to the variance in the projected data. Okay, and this ensures that it preserves the information content of the transformed representation. Once we do this PCA and then get the reduced representation, and this we can use it for doing any of the different pattern analysis tasks like your classification, regression, or the clustering. Okay, all right. So yeah, this is the story about the principal component analysis and the dimension reduction. And before going further into the classification technique using the support vector machine, I just want to give a small pause here. And if you have any doubt, I'm ready to open to answer that. Otherwise, we can move further. Okay, is the things are clear? Yes? Anybody having any doubt? Yes? Or if you don't have any doubt, shall we proceed further?
Yes, sir, you can proceed. We can have the Q&A session towards the end of this talk.
Okay, all right, fine. Yeah, because
yes, Dr. Dilip.
Usually, yeah, yes.
Yes, sir. Please proceed, sir.
Yes, yeah. Okay, all right. Okay, fine. So I usually want to cross-verify with myself that do you have any doubts? So it will be easy to clear at that time. I think somebody has a doubt, I think. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir. So I wanted to know, you have taken 10,000 readings. Okay,
Yeah.
and how would you know that exactly at what point you are getting the exact image?
No, yeah, that's what you can see here. So this is what I'm showing you. So usual thumb rule is that you first, once you get this 10,000 this thing, right? The feature vectors, right? So
Yes,
you will get the, after the eigen analysis, you get the 10,000 eigenvalues and 10,000 corresponding eigenvectors. Okay. So here you're seeing that there's almost most of the elements are having eigenvalues are having the smaller values. Okay. So, but if you really look into the first 100 eigenvalues, so here it is giving you the around 40 to 50, right? It is giving you the clue that the eigenvalues are leading, the maximum eigenvalues, right? Are you following it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is the thumb rule. Around that, we fix that. Okay, this is sufficient.
So, but
that's how
in the result, you have shown that on 200 you are getting the exact point.
Yeah, exactly. On 200 also I am getting the same. So if you compare it with the 240, you don't have any much difference. Okay.
Okay.
So that is there.
But
so
graph, we are not getting that.
Yeah, in the graph you won't be getting that. So, but roughly, see, even if you consider all the 10,000 data point, 10,000 eigenvectors, okay, and if you project it, you will going to reconstruct into the original data itself. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Are you following with me? But I'm still consider that, but the representation what I'm getting, the 10,000 dimension representation after transformation, that is different than your original representation, but still the information content will be there. What this is showing is that instead of taking all the 10,000, that's also good. I'll take only the subset, still I preserve maximum information. Okay. The idea of that is that my data dimension is reduced. By that, I am able to build the classifiers in an efficient manner. Okay, that is the important thing.
Okay,
is it clear?
Sir.
Hope I answered your doubt.
Yes, sir.
Right? Okay. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, welcome. So, anybody else? Okay. Yeah, so if no other things, so let's move further. So now I'm going to the other dimension, that is the classification technique, where we'll focus on the techniques followed by the support vector machine for doing this pattern classification. Okay, so here I would like to make one clarification before going here. Most importantly, when we say the PCA, PCA is not a classifier. Okay, please keep this in mind. So many of the time when I review certain papers and some of the interviews and other things, when we ask about the PCA, many of them say that the PCA classifier they call it. Okay, that's a wrong thing. PCA is not a classifier. PCA is a data representation technique. Basically, it transforms the data from one representation to the another representation. Okay, once the PCA gives the new representation, that representation can be given to any of the classifiers. It could be neural network or the k-nearest neighbor classifier or the decision tree or the support vector machine, anything for doing the learning the classification techniques. Okay, so that is very much important. Okay, the PCA is just a dimension reduction technique to get the new representation. That's all. Okay, so keeping this in mind, so let us move to the classification technique. So I hope that you are all aware of the classification technique, what it does. And in the previous session, the professor might have given the very nice introduction about the classification and various other techniques. Okay, so here the support vector machine is a two-class classification technique. Okay, so to understand this, let's still take the same two classes, like classifying in tissue of the images as a normal or abnormal. Consider the same case itself. Okay, just for the understanding purpose, out of the 10,000 representation, I just considered only the two dimensions for this representation. So if I take the data as a two-dimensional representation, then you can see that as you see in this graph, so each class, it acts as a point in that two-dimensional representation. Now I need to build a classifier to learn the discrimination between these two data sets so it can differentiate between the data of the two classes. Okay, that is what the classification is needed is concerned. Basically, so just to give the overview, so the classification cases, given your images of your tissues, okay, we perform the feature extraction, and then also during training phase, so we have the associated class labels will be there. In the training process, we try to learn the association of each of the examples with their corresponding class labels, and we build the classifier. During the test case, so for the same test example, so we extract the features and then we give it to the classifier to make a decision whether it's a normal or abnormal class. So this is the overview of your classification stage is concerned. Okay, now the important thing is that when you build the classifier, okay, basically you try to learn the association with the class label with its corresponding example. Okay, so now there are different techniques are there to build the classifier. The specific thing what we are seeing is the support vector machine. Then this support vector machine, it follows basically what it does is that classifier try to learn the pattern of classification from the data by learning from its corresponding class labels and the corresponding examples. Okay, and this learning procedure, the specific learning procedure what the support vector machine follows is the discriminative learning procedure. Okay, or the discriminative learning method. Basically what it try to does is that it's a two-class classification. We have the data between the two classes. So in the discriminative learning techniques, we try to learn the decision surface that separates the region of separation of the two classes. We try to learn that decision surface, but that separates the region of the two classes. Okay, so that decision surface, it is represented as a discriminant function. We try to learn directly from the data. Okay, for example, if you consider this example here, so between the data of the two classes, so if I keep in the two-dimensional space, so if I keep a line as a line to separate the region of two classes, then I can say that this linear function, line is a linear function. Okay, this linear function is a discriminant function that separates the region of the two classes. Okay, and this helps me to, on one side of the line there is one class, and on the other side of the line there is another class. Okay, what we try to learn in the what we try to do in this discriminative learning methods is that try to learn this discriminant function. This is a line in this particular case that should be placed in the region of separation between the two classes if the two classes are well separated. Okay, or if the two classes are not well separated, usually different techniques are associated with that, different classification techniques. The perceptron support vector machine, they follow this learning this linear discriminant function. Okay, Suppose the data is not linearly separable. That means that the data of the two classes are highly overlapping. Then the region of separation between the two classes will be a nonlinear function. Okay, so that time the discriminant function or the decision surface is the nonlinear surface. Okay, so the various techniques like even the support vector machine using the kernel methods and in neural network, they try to approximate the nonlinear decision surface that is present between the region of separation between the two classes. Okay, the first thing we need to consider here is that even in neural network or in the support vector machine, we are trying to learn this discriminant surface. Okay, the function that's governing that discriminant surface that's separating the region of surface of the two classes. Okay, in this particular case, the discriminant function is a linear discriminant function, and in this particular case, the discriminant function is a non-linear function that needs to be learned. Okay, that's important thing. Okay, one caveat here for learning this non-linear discriminant function is that, so we do not know the closed form expression for this non-linear discriminant functions. Okay, so using this neural network, we try to approximate that particular discriminant function. But in the support vector machine, that does it in a very clever way. So in case of the linear discriminant function cases, we know the closed form expression for a linear function. Okay, the support vector machine, what it does is that it transforms the data to the higher dimensional representation, higher dimensional space, where it assumes to be a data is linearly separable, and then in that space it learns this linear discriminant function. Okay, that in turn, when it projected back to the original representation, it become a nonlinear boundary. Okay, so that's what you're going to see at the later stages. Okay, so that's important thing. Okay, so what is important thing here is that the support vector machine, basically it predominantly learns the linear discriminant function. Okay, so okay, I'll just give a 1 minute pause here, or one few second pause here to clarify certain things here. Important thing from now onwards, so next 1 hour of session, what we are going to see with respect to the support vector machine is that we are trying to learn the discriminant function. What kind of a discriminant function? It's a linear discriminant function that separates the region of the two surface, separates the region of the two classes. Okay, that is the important thing. Okay, and each discriminant function has their own parameter that specifies that, and in the process of learning, we are trying to learn those parameters. That is the important thing you keep in mind. Okay, so with this we'll go forward. Okay, so the linear discriminant function means the region of the two classes will be separated by a linear surface. What do you mean by the linear surface? It is a line in the two-dimensional space, it's a plane in the three-dimensional space, and then in the linear surface in the more than three-dimensional space, so it is called as the hyperplane. Okay, that is a linear surface. Okay, in case of the two-dimensional space, as I was telling here, a line is the one which acts as a linear surface. Okay, so now this line, it's a linear function. So how do you represent the line? It is basically in a two-dimensional space, a line is specified by this linear equation. Hope you are all seeing this, right? W1x1 plus W2x2 plus W0 is equal to 0. In this case, x1 and x2 are your data associated with the two dimension. Okay, W1, W2, and W0, they are the coefficients of this linear function, and that coefficients of this linear function has to be learned such that the positioning of this line is in the region of separation of the two classes. That is what the goal of this learning this linear discriminant function. Okay, why I am calling this as a line, this linear function as a line? If I transform this line and represent in terms of everything in terms of the x2, if I push everything onto this side, all this equation equate to the x2, you will be finding this equation is represented as this way. What is this? This particular term is indicating your slope m, and this particular term is indicating your y-intercept. Altogether, now it's x2 is represented as the x2 is equal to m into x1 plus c. This is the characteristics equation of your straight line, right? This is with respect to in the two-dimensional space. Okay. Now, similarly, in the three-dimensional space, this linear equation, it will be having the w 3 into x3 that will be there. That shows you the giving you the characteristic equation of a plane. Okay, in general, for any d-dimensional space, so this linear surface is called as a hyperplane, and this hyperplane is represented as this linear function. This is nothing but the summation of wi xi over the each of the dimension. And in other words, this expression is also equal to the inner product operation of your x vector onto the w vector. Okay, is that clear here? So now, in this particular case, what is known to us is only this x vector, that is nothing but your data vector. What is not known to us is this parameter vector w. Okay, so we need to learn this w such that the line is placed in the region of separation of the two classes. This we learn from the training examples. Okay, so that is what we are trying to do here. Okay, now this linear expression, what I'm talking about, w transpose x plus w naught, this is what I call it as a discriminant function, and I'll be learning this discriminant function here. Okay, now one characteristics of these discriminant functions you need to understand here. Okay, to make it understand that, so if you consider that any point that lies on this discriminant function, then its value will be equal to 0. Okay, let us try to understand these basic things with respect to the with respect to a line. Okay, in two-dimensional space. Let's consider a straight line with the equation x2 plus x1 minus 1 is equal to 0. Okay, when you put this is what my discriminant function is. Okay, and if I put it in a in the x and y coordinate, okay, what you can going to see that this is the line indicating this x2 plus x1 minus 1 is equal to 0. Now, if I take the value, okay, 1 0 and 0 1, okay, these are the points that is lying on the line. Okay, so now if I substitute this 1 0 or 0 1 onto this equation, this discriminant function equation, what are you going to get as a g of x? That g of x value will be equal to 0. That means that any data points lying on this line having this discriminant value is equal to 0. That's very important. Okay, hope you are following this. Okay, now if I consider the another data point 0 0, okay, when I substitute this 0 0 into this x2 and x1 here, what I'm going to get the value for g of x? G of x is a minus 1. That is, the value of g of x is negative. Similarly, if I take the value 1 1 and then I substitute the x2 and x1 here, what I'm going to get for the g of x? I'm going to get the g of x as a positive value, plus 1. Okay, what it is giving the idea is that for any discriminant function, linear discriminant function, in this case the line, it has two regions. One is the positive side, another one is the negative side. Okay, so for any data point which is lying on this positive side, for this your discriminant function g of x value is equal to is a positive. What is the g of x? Basically, it's a linear discriminant function, linear function. Similarly, for any data point on the negative side of the line, okay, its discriminant function g of x value will be negative. That's a very much important thing. Now, if you really see that this green region is a data of one class, and if it is a the pink is a data of the another class, so I can make a decision for any test example that if it's on the positive side, it belongs to class 1, and its negative side, it belongs to class 2. So this is how this decision is made. That's for the test case. For the training case, we have to come up with this parameters of this line or this hyperplane such that it is placed in the region of separation of the two classes. That's the important thing. Okay, so I'll just give you the very quick overview of the perceptual learning, because that's very much essential in understanding the motivation for going for the support vector machine. Okay, perceptron learning is a very simple algorithm for learning this linear discriminant function present in the region of separation of the two classes, provided they are linearly separable. Okay, basically what I'll try to do here is that the algorithm is given when the material is shared down to you, so you can go through the algorithm, but I'll quickly show with explain this with respect to an example itself here. Okay, so basically we start with an initial value for my w vector. This is nothing but the parameters of my hyperplane. Okay, and for that I'll try to see that, so how many examples, training examples are on the correct side and how many are on the wrong side. Okay, I take the examples which are on the wrong side. For this particular case, these black points are on the wrong side because they are misclassified. Okay, and only for those examples, I will update the value for the W as a proportion of that particular data examples. When I update the value of the vector, so of the W vector, basically what it happens is that the position of the line in the space, it moves. Okay, so this continues till I reach a position where all the examples in my training set are properly classified. Basically, in the perceptron learning, I update the weight vectors and each of the iterations such that I'm pushing the line towards the minimizing the error. That means that pushing the line towards the region of separation of the two classes. Okay. So now once I have this thing, now this W vector associated to this particular hyperplane will be the one which is learned from the data. During the test case, given the test pattern X, I'll try to find what is the discriminant function with respect to that. Okay, W transpose X plus W naught when there's a discriminant value. If it is greater than 0, then it assigned to the class 2, and then if it is less than 0, it's assigned to the class 1. Okay, as an example here, if you consider this blue rectangle triangle here, okay, when I compute the W transpose X plus W naught for this particular test example, what will happen? It will be greater than 0 and it's in the positive side. I'll assign this as a class 2. Okay. Now, if I take another test example, this blue one, a black triangle. So geometrically, if you distance-wise, if you really see that, it's very close to the black class 1. Okay. But if you really see that, since it is on the other side, W transpose X plus W naught is greater than 0 for this, corresponding to this hyperplane. Okay. It is classified as a C2, but actually it is closer to this class 1. It has been misclassified here. Okay, this is the drawback here. Basically, what we are trying to see here is that this perceptron learning try to come up with a discriminant function, learn the discriminant function as just to separate the region of class, but it doesn't guarantee that that region of separation in which that line is present, it's an optimal or not. Okay, it doesn't guarantee the optimal separating hyperplane. So that is the important drawback over here. Okay, so hope you are all understanding this, what I'm trying to say here. Okay, so now if we really look into take the data of the two classes training examples. So between the region of separation of the two classes, there is a infinitely many number of separating hyperplanes can be possible. Among all those infinitely many separating hyperplane, only one separating hyperplane is optimal, such that number of misclassifications can be minimized as much as possible. Okay, this perceptron learning algorithm does not guarantee you the optimal separating hyperplane. Okay, and this is what is the motivation to go to the support vector machines, where it guarantees to give the optimal separating hyperplane. Okay, that separates the region of the two classes. Okay, this is the main motivation for going for the support vector machine. Okay, before going into the understanding that, okay, how does it do that and how it guarantees it, so we need to understand one of the terminology, what we call it as a margin. Okay, so the most importantly, if you want to see here is that, so if you want to say that any of the the separating hyperplane that is supposed to be present in the middle of the two region of the classes, then it should be present in the equidistance between the border of the two boundary of the two classes. Okay, how do you find the boundary? That's a bigger question. Okay, we don't have any clear-cut answers over there. Okay, but so we need to have certain constraints such that it is present in the middle. Okay, that is what it's trying to do in the support vector machine. Let's try to see what is trying to put as a constraint here in order to make itself that the region of separation present in the middle of the two classes. Okay, so we know that, just to recap, we know that g of x, which is W transpose X plus W naught, is a linear discriminant function. So now, by definition, for any data point x, its distance to the separating hyperplane is given by this g of x divided by the Euclidean norm of the weight vector. Okay, I'm not going to show the derivation for this, so interested people can look into the linear algebra and see that, okay, why this has come. Actually, because of the limitation of the time, I'm not going with respect to that, but take it granted that by definition, distance of any point to the hyperplane is given by this particular expression. Okay, so now suppose this is my hyperplane, and then this is the different data points are there on the space. So the distance of this x1 onto this separating hyperplane can be given by the g of x1 by the norm of the weight vector, and this is the g of x2 by the norm of weight vector, and this is the g of x3 by norm of the weight vector. Okay, this gives the, basically I'm trying to see that that's going to give you the distance of a vector to the separating hyperplane. Okay, but now with this I'll define a new quantity here. That's what is called as the margin of an hyperplane. Okay, margin of an hyperplane is defined as the distance of the nearest training example to the hyperplane. Okay, so margin is the distance of the nearest training example to the hyperplane. Okay, keep this definition in mind. Okay, this is what we are trying to around this itself, entire concept of the support vector machine is revolving. Okay, keep this definition in mind. Distance of the nearest training example to the hyperplane is called as the margin. Okay, now for the support vector machines, now we have the data of the two classes. Okay, suppose that, assume that this particular green line, what you are seeing here, is a separating hyperplane. When I say it is in the middle of the region of the separation of the two classes, okay, then the one of the data point should be it's very closer to the separating hyperplane from both the sides. Okay, remember here this blue dotted line and the red dotted line are represented as the margin here, because these two data points are the nearest example to the separating hyperplane. Most importantly, this red example and this example, they are equidistant here, because this separating hyperplane is in the middle of the region. Okay, so that is important. That's a margin here. Okay, now if you really look into here, so there are, what I want to see here is that I want to have the separating hyperplane, okay, such that I'll define the margin. Okay, now there's one more catch comes here. So this is what you see here. Okay, now if you consider this another one, separating hyperplane, this also present in the region of separation of these two classes, and the dotted red and blue lines indicating the corresponding margins. Okay, now among these two things, which one is having the maximum margin? Obviously the second one, right? Obviously the second one having the maximum margin. Okay, so what is the benefit of that? Suppose now in this particular case, if suppose this is, I consider as a in this case also the separating hyperplane in the middle of the region of two separation, but its margin is less here. Suppose if you consider this new square, blue square here, this is on the wrong side of the separating hyperplane. This can be considered as a misclassified. Okay, but if I consider the second margin, which is larger than the previous one, okay, so it can very well separate this. It's still under the right side of the separating hyperplane, right? So the important goal of this support vector machine here is that it is not just identifying the separating hyperplane in the middle of the region of the two classes. It has to define the margin such that among all possible margins which you're going to get for the different separating hyperplane, need to choose the margin which is maximum among all the other margins. Okay, that is important. And this is what we call it as a maximum margin separating hyperplane. Okay, and this is what is termed as the optimal separating hyperplane, defined in the context of the support vector machine. Okay, basically support vector machine try to search for that separating hyperplane which is having the maximum margin among all other possible separating hyperplanes it is having. Is that clear for you? Hope the concept is clear at this point. Okay, if you have any doubt, please stop me here. Otherwise, I'll going further. Okay. Okay, let me go further. If you have anything, just please stop me in between. Okay, so now this is what is the case. Okay, I define this margin as 1 by norm of the weight vector, basically, and importantly, it is on both the sides. It's equidistance. The total margin is nothing but the 2 by norm of the weight vector. That is the difference between the two margins here. And with respect to this, what I'm saying, so any point lying on this margin, on this hyperplane, the discriminant value is 0. And this is on the positive side. That's why it is a +1. And this is a -1. Okay. Now this is the case. Now, I'll define the classifier in such a way that, in constraint such a way that I want to build this separating hyperplane to in the middle of the two regions such that all the data points should present on the correct side of their respective margin. That is the important thing. Okay. In case of the perceptron, what we are trying to see that we are trying to define during the training case. So the examples which are on the right side of the separating hyperplane, that is sufficient. Okay. But in this particular case, we are trying to put the separating hyperplane such that all my training examples should be on the correct side of their respective margins. Okay, this is what is the important thing. Okay, that is what I am trying to see that. Okay, like that, I need to search for those separating hyperplane which is having the maximum margin. Okay, this is a purely an optimization problem. Out of all the several separating hyperplane, I am selecting that separating hyperplane whose margin is maximum. Okay, that is the optimization framework. Okay, that is why the constraint for my optimal separating hyperplane is that the W transpose X plus W naught, when it is multiplied with the Yn, where Yn is the class label, it is +1 for the positive class, -1 for the negative class. Okay, it should be always be greater than or equal to 1. Okay, so if you really look into this here, for this, if I multiply this with the Yn, okay, if the examples are belongs to the positive class, Yn is a positive example, then this W transpose Xn multiplied by that Yn, that should be greater than 1. Similarly, if when I multiply this here with the Yn, if the Yn is -1, then again it is a greater than 1. So that is what is the constraint we are putting it here. Okay, this constraint is for every training examples, n is equal to 1 to n. Okay, now what is my cost function I'm trying to maximize here? I'm trying to maximize the margin of separation, that is the 2 by norm of the weight vector. I'm maximizing this. Okay, so here important thing in the optimization is that, so when I'm maximizing this margin with the 2 by norm of the weight vector, it's also equal to the minimizing the Euclidean norm of the weight vectors. Okay, it's if the reciprocal of that, if you consider that, then it becomes a minimization operation in the optimization. Okay, so now for all the n training examples in my case, so my cost function is I am maximizing this quantity Euclidean norm is I am minimizing this Euclidean norm. In turn, what I'm doing is I'm trying to maximize that term, this term, okay, and such that, okay, this is my constraint applied to each of the example. It's a constraint optimization problem. Again, those who are interested, look into the constraint optimization problem, how it is done in the optimization framework. Because of the limitation of time, I'm not going much deeper into the optimization theory here. So in such kind of a constraint optimizations are usually solved by converting this constraint optimization into the unconstrained optimization problem and then finding the gradient to solve them. Okay, so that is what is one of the things by using this Lagrangian form, putting them into Lagrangian form to make them it's a unconstrained form actually. So that is what we try to do here. This is the Lagrangian form of that. So this becomes a, so where these constraints are subtracted with respect to this, weighted with an coefficient which is called as the Lagrangian coefficient associated with this each of the data points here. Okay, and then this is now it becomes an unconstrained optimization where we try to obtain we solve this by using the gradient descent by performing the computing the gradient of this cost function with respect to its parameter, that is the W vector and the W naught, and then equate it to 0 to solve this. Okay, when we equate it to, when you perform this differentiation and equate it to 0, and what we're going to get is that we get the two optimality conditions I'm getting. So one is I'm getting a closed form expression for the W as the product of the data point, its corresponding class label, and its corresponding the product of corresponding Lagrangian coefficients, and the sum of all the samples. Okay, and another constraint is this thing. So okay, all right. So yeah, so is everything is fine so far? Am I connected?
Yes, sir, you are connected.
Okay,
Fine, sir.
Okay, fine. So all right. So So now these outcomes, what I'm getting here, if I substitute this back into this equation 1, and if I solve this, what I'm going to get is that I'm going to get a new form of the cost function. This is what I'm going to get. Okay, sorry, because of the limitation of time, I am skipping a lot of the mathematics associated with that, but it's a good that you can work it out. You're going to get this thing, and then such that this condition, I'm going to get it here. All right. So basically what is happening here is that just one word, one sentence answer to this is that, so usually when we solve this optimization using Lagrangian multiplier form, so when we differentiating and solve that equation, we get an expression for the expressions for this alpha, W and W naught. Okay. So, but in this particular case, what is happening here is that number of parameter to be optimized with respect to that is they are the large numbers. Okay, though we get the expression for the W, which is what we are requesting, but we don't have the value for alpha n. Okay, so that's why it is can't be solved in one step. So that's why that is what is called the primal step. So what we're going to get is the dual step, where entire my objective function is a function of my Lagrangian coefficients alpha n. Okay, if you really look into this objective function, this is a quadratic in terms of the alpha. So it can be solved by using any of the quadratic optimization problem, and this is going to give a global optimal solution, okay, such that after applying this optimization problem, what we are going to get is we're going to get the optimal value for this Lagrangian coefficients alpha. Okay, so these optimal values such that the sum of the Lagrangian coefficients, they take the non-zero value, and most of them take the zero values. Okay, it can be shown that you know that this Lagrangian coefficients are associated with every data points. Okay, it can be mathematically shown that these non-zero Lagrangian coefficients are corresponding to those data points which are lying on the margin, and those data points which are lying on the margin, they are called as the support vectors. Okay, you can say that after the optimization, what we are going to get is we are going to get the non-zero values for those Lagrangian coefficients which are lying on the separating margin. Okay, on the margin. Okay, and there acts as a support vectors. Okay, now with respect to this, when you see that now my optimal value for my optimal expression for my W vector, which is the coefficients for my separating hyperplane. So this becomes n is equal to 1 to ns. Ns is nothing but the number of examples, number of support vectors for which the Lagrangian coefficients are non-zero. Okay, so now we're having only those subset of examples, and these support vectors are nothing but the examples which are in the boundary. That is what is the outcome of this optimization or outcome of this training procedure. Now during the test case, what we're going to do that. So now for any test example, so I'll just compute with W transpose X with W naught. So where this W, what we get is the optimal value of this W, and then if the g of x, this discriminant function, is greater than 0, then it belongs to the class 1, otherwise it belongs to the class 2. Okay, is it clear? So this is what the support vector machine, by which it guarantees that the region of separation between the two classes is in the center, not just a center. The optimal separating hyperplane is having the maximum margin. Okay, this you can see here pictorially, or the illustration I can show you here. So you can see here, this is the data belongs to the two classes. Okay, and this is the region of separation between the two classes, which is obtained from the perceptron. It is not guaranteed that it is in the middle region of separation of the middle of these two classes. But when I use the same thing for the support vector machine, you can see that the region of separation or the boundary, decision boundary, is in the middle of the two classes. Okay, and you can also see that the data points, okay, which are circled over here, you can see here, right? Hope you can okay, hope you can see here circled these things. Okay, so these things are nothing but the support vectors. Okay, you can see that they are the one which are in the boundary of the two classes. Is that clear for you? Is the concept of the support vector machine is clear for you?
Audience, if you have any doubt, ask the professor.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. See, only thing here is that what we try to do here is that we are trying to get that optimal separating hyperplane. When the kind of a situation we consider is the data set is linearly separable. As long as linearly separable is concerned, whatever the concept which you have discussed now, it works very well. Okay, but the kind of a margin what we are getting here, we call it as a hard margin because it is hardly saying that it is in a hard way. It is saying these are the boundaries, and then there is no change from that. Okay, but in reality, data is not like this. Okay, there is some sort of overlapping that is existing between the region of separation of the two classes. Okay, now when there is a overlapping is there, but still we can see that here most of the 90% of the examples are linearly separable. Only very few percent of the examples are not linearly separable. Okay, in that situation, still we can use this linear classifier to separate them by allowing some sort of errors to happen there. Okay, in the previous cases, we are not allowing to happen any of the errors, but here we are trying to do that. Okay, that is the second condition, and this is the main crux of the support vector machine, where it can perform well even on the data which is not linearly separable cases. Okay, so now let me consider the linearly non-separable cases here. That means that, so if you really look into this here, most of the examples are linearly separable and very few examples are not linearly separable. Okay, in this particular, if you really see that some of these examples, like if you follow the cursor, this one, this two blue one, and these things, so these are all the examples which are not on the correct side of their hyperplane. Okay, some of them are on the not on the margin, they are very close to this. Okay, that means that these are the one examples which are restricting me to say that the examples are linearly separable. Okay, if you really see that some sort of an error is going to happen here. Okay, if you really look into this blue example here, this violates the margin property, because what I expect in the previous case is that it should be either this margin should be on this or this, it should be on the correct side of the margin. Okay, this is violating the margin property, and this one is also violating the margin property. But if you really look into this case, so this is on the wrong side of the separating hyperplane. This also on the wrong side of the separating hyperplane. That means that these two examples are causing the misclassification. Okay, these are the two kind of errors that we are allowing to let it happen. Okay, then I'm giving a relaxation to the condition that instead of going for the hard margin cases, I'm giving a relaxation that, okay, let me allow some errors to happen so that I can handle this overlapping cases in a better way. Okay, that is the idea going to be happen here. So for these cases, those examples which are causing an error, so I define a kind of a quantity, this zeta what I'm representing here, this indicates the deviation of these data points from their respective margin. Okay, so this deviation what I'm considering here, and this is what is called as the error, what is I'm going to have here, this error is given by the hinge loss. Basically what this hinge loss indicates is that if that supporting the examples are lying on the margin or on the correct side of the margin, this loss is 0, and loss is positive only if it is on the wrong side of the margin. Okay, that is the hinge loss. So now my cost function for now, because of this hinge loss, my constraint, earlier it was only the this quantity was not there. Earlier it was only the yn into w transpose xn plus w naught is greater than or equal to 1, it was there. Now I am introducing the minus zeta n also here as a part of this, allowing this deviation. Okay, this is my constraint, and this zeta n is always a positive quantity. This is the constraint on that. Okay, now my cost function will be changed. So earlier I am just maximizing the margin. So now my cost function, if you really look into that, I'm not only minimizing this Euclidean norm of these weight vectors, okay, I'm also going to minimize this particular total error caused by this deviations, what I'm having here. Okay, is it clear for you? So now my cost function changes. Not only I am maximizing the margin, I'm also trying to minimizing this error also. Okay, that is what I'm trying to do that. And this is the constraint that needs to satisfy. As I told earlier, so to solve this thing, we are using this Lagrangian multiplier form. So based on the Lagrangian multiplier form, okay, so in this particular case, the parameter C, what you are seeing here, this is a trade-off parameter between the margin of the error between the two classes. Okay, it's a trade-off between the margin and the error of the training data. Okay, so now I'm just fast forwarding the procedure here. So the Lagrangian function, what I'm specifying here. So using the Lagrangian function, because these are the constraints that goes to this here, I'm converting that into the unconstrained optimization problem. And then I'll perform this condition of optimality by performing the gradient with respect to the W vector, zeta n and the W naught. Okay, and then when I solve them, still again, I'm getting the same expression for my W vector as I got in the previous case. And this constraint is also same. And new constraint is coming here, which is that the Lagrangian coefficients, earlier it is just a non-negative. So now it is a bounded between the value of C and as well as 0. This is a trade-off parameter and this thing. Okay, substituting this back into the expression, the Lagrangian primal expression in the previous case, what we're going to get is that, so we get the same expression as what we saw in the earlier case. Okay, this is basically now my optimization problem. I'm trying to do this quadratic optimization with respect to the only the parameter Lagrangian coefficients which are associated with each of the data points. Okay, now the beauty is that when I do this quadratic optimization, see what I get is the optimal values for this alpha values. Okay, as I mentioned, only few of the alpha values will be non-zero, rest of all them will be 0, and these non-zero alpha values and their corresponding examples, they formed as the support vectors. Okay, and with this thing, so the optimal value for my W vector will be looks like this. Is exactly the same as what we did in the previous case. Okay, so now if you really look into this, now what are the number of support vectors? They are not only the one which are lying on the margin, and also the examples which are on the wrong side of the supporting wrong side of the respective margin. They are also become the support vectors. Okay, and this kind of a condition is now we call it as a soft margin, because we are just relaxing the condition that they are good enough to allow certain error to happen, so that I can maximize my margin in order to handle that overlapping case also here. Okay, that is the idea in this particular case. Okay, is that clear, all of you? Right? So now what we have seen so far is that we are trying to learn this linear surface that better separates the region of the classes when the data is linearly separable or linearly non-separable. When I say linear non-separable, most of the examples are linearly separable. Okay, but in reality, the data is very bad. That means that they're very complex, and there's a huge overlapping that is existing on the data. Okay, and most of the examples are overlapping with each other, and the region of separation between them is a very highly complex non-linear surface. Okay, that is the real scenario. Okay, so now what you're going to see that how the support vector machine addresses that particular situation, and with that we can wind this particular session. Okay, so that is the important. What we started with the thing is that, see, we are looking at the different complexity that's existing in the data. We started with the data which are linearly separable. With respect to that, how the support vector machine is going to give you the optimal separating hyperplane. That's what we've seen. Okay, now we added a little difficulty into that case, that most of the examples are linearly separable, but few of them are not linearly separable. How to handle that? That is by applying that soft margin situation, allowing the error to happen. So that is what we address that particular situation. Now what we are trying to address the situation is that now data is highly non-linearly separable. Okay, how to address this? By using the support vector machine. That's what we're trying to see there. Okay, so this case, when the data is non-linearly separable, okay, so to identify that, to learn that underlying non-linear discriminant function, support vector machine make use of the concept called the kernel methods. Okay, so I'm not going very deep into these cases. I'll just try to give the bigger picture about how this kernel method helps in addressing this issue. Okay, what is that is involved with this here? Okay, so, and most importantly, the underlying technique what we saw earlier is the same thing is applicable here also, but only thing is that there's a change of transformation, or the transformation of the space is going to come, and that is what is induced by this kernel concepts. Okay, I'll try to give you this concept at the beginning, and that helps you to understand that concept. Okay, see, basically the key concept that associated with this kernel method is that, so in kernel method it involves in a operation, it's a non-linear transformation operation on the data to some of the higher dimensional feature space. Okay, and this higher dimensional feature space will be induced by the Mercer kernel. That means that there is a Mercer theorem that is applicable. Any function that does the transformation to the higher dimensional feature space by satisfying that Mercer's theorem, okay, what it guarantees is that in that higher dimensional feature space, so the solution will be more linear, and then in that transformed space you can obtain the optimal linear solution in that space. Okay, basically what we try to do here is that is based on one of the theorem is also there. That's what is called as the Cover's theorem. What it says is that when we transform from the lower dimensional representation, lower dimensional space to the higher dimensional space, which is induced by the Mercer's theorem. Okay, and in that higher dimensional space is expected that data is more linearly separable. Okay, so in that particular case, if I'm able to do this particular transformation, now you can see that instead of doing this support vector machines, finding the optimal separating hyperplane in the input space, okay, I can do the same linear, finding the linear discriminant function in the higher dimensional feature space. Okay, that is the idea over here. Okay, now the important thing is that we need to know that what is that function that transforms it. Okay, but the problem is that we do not know what is that function is. Okay, so the idea of this kernel method is that, all right, I do not have to explicitly know the function that makes this transformation. Okay, but I can do a trick such that the Mercer's theorem states that the inner product operation, I hope that you understand the inner product operation. So the inner product operation between the pair of examples in the transformed space is equivalent to some operations, kernel operations here. Okay, so if I'm able to come up with a inner product kernel function which indirectly specifies this inner product operation in the higher dimensional feature space, then I'm fine. Okay, that is important. Okay, so that is what we need to understand that. Okay, so keep this in mind. I'll come back to this kernel trick at the in a 5-10 minutes. Okay, so this concept will be clear at that time. I'm hoping so. Okay, just to illustrate this particular case, consider this data set where we have the data of the two classes, so blue and red, so which is separated by this region of separation here is a circle here. Okay, this circle is a nonlinear function. Okay, now this is in 2-dimensional space. So what I'll do is that I'll just transform this 2-dimensional data into the 3 dimensions, where each dimension in the 3 dimension is the monomials of polynomials of degree 2. What are the monomials of the polynomials of degree 2? x1 square, x2 square, and the x1, x2. So now if I transform this 2-dimensional data into the 3-dimensional data here, this where each dimensions are governed by the monomials of polynomials of degree 2, okay, degree up to 2. So you can see here is that in that three-dimensional space, you can clearly see the data is still separable. Now you can clearly see that data I can separate by a hyperplane. This is what the Cover's theorem is saying that. So when you make a transformation from a input space, there's a two-dimensional space here to this higher dimensional space is the three-dimensional space. Now the non-linearly separable class which are there here, so that it becomes a more linearly separable here. That is the idea here. Okay, that is what I'm trying to do that. Okay, now let's assume that I have a function that is able to do the transformation. Okay, so that's a phi is the transformation. I know that. So it does make a transformation to the higher dimensional space where the data is more linearly separable. Okay, so now if you really look into this case, so if you pay attention here, now instead of x, in the previous case I considered the W transpose x plus W naught. X is a data in the input space. Now I have applied this nonlinear transformation. Now I am in the phi space. Okay, are you with me with this now? Just simple thing you need to consider here. Just assume that I know the transformation. I have transformed all my training examples to that higher dimensional feature space. Okay, and in that higher dimensional feature space, since it satisfies this Cover's theorem, so it says that the data is more linearly separable. Okay, now I can apply the same in the transformed space also. That means in the transformed space, I will be performing the same, obtaining this soft margin with respect to the optimal separating hyperplane in the transformed feature space. Okay, in the same technique what we discussed just a few minutes before. Okay, only difference is that I'm changing all x into the phi of x. That's a new representation, and rest all the things are the same thing. Okay, I just skipping this all this thing because it's exactly the same as what we just now did it for the linearly non-separable cases. Okay, now instead of the same operation happening, instead of happening in the input space, it is happening in the higher dimensional feature space. Okay, now here also the after the optimization, whatever the Lagrangian coefficients we are getting, there's the data in that transformed space which are highly, which are the support, which are the support vectors in that transformed space. Okay, so now importantly, if you see here, you need to keep in mind about this. Follow the cursor here. So this inner product operation, what I'm taking here, this inner product operation is happening in the higher dimensional feature space. Okay, this is the important thing in the solving this optimization problem. And when you look into this optimal value for the W vector, which is now in terms of this transformed representation. Okay, now if you apply the values to this, what is that? For any test example now, so we given any test example x, so it first transformed to the that space, transformed space. There we perform this W transpose phi of x plus W naught. So if you really look into this, it is the inner product between this test example, transformed test example, and the support vectors in the transformed space. Okay, that is important. Okay, now importantly required for us is that we need to, in order to do this, we require this inner product operation to be performed. Okay, now this is where everything is revolving around this inner product operations, pairwise inner product operations. Okay, now as I already mentioned, in order to do this, I need to know explicitly this transforming this phi space. As I already mentioned, I do not know which function does that. Okay, the trick what they follow here, it's what is called as the kernel trick. Instead of this, look at this inner product operation. This inner product operation is happening between the examples in the transformed space. Now instead of this, suppose if I define a function k on the input examples itself, in the input space itself, such that effect of this is equivalent to the inner product operation which you are doing in the kernel space. If I'm able to come up with any function which does this, then I'm done. I need not have to worry about explicitly transforming into the kernel feature space. This is the kernel trick, we call it actually. Okay. Now the discriminant function, now this inner product operation will be replaced by this kernel function. Okay. Now the question arises, do we have any functions, such kernel functions, okay, which performs the inner measure of similarity between these two examples in the input space, which is equivalent to the performing the inner product operation in the higher dimensional feature space. Okay, now question is that, is there any such function? Fortunately, yes, we have certain functions. Okay, and these functions should satisfy some properties associated with the Mercer theorem. Okay, so we'll see that which of the functions they satisfies this Mercer theorem, so that we can blindly use those functions as a kernel functions to perform this instead of doing the explicit transformations. Okay, and most importantly, if you look into this kernel function, you compute the kernel function between the every pair of examples. Okay, so in the training set, suppose I'm having the n training examples. When I compute this kernel-gram matrix between the every pair of examples, okay, it results into a n cross n matrix, and that matrix is called as the kernel-gram matrix. Okay, and this kernel-gram matrix should satisfy some necessary conditions. What is that necessary condition? This kernel-gram matrix should be a symmetric and positive semi-definite. That means that eigenvalue should be non-negative. Okay, if any kernel functions, okay, when you perform this kernel-gram matrix between every pair of examples in my training examples, which results in kernel-gram matrix, and it satisfies these two properties, symmetric and positive semi-definite, then that's a valid kernel function, and that can be very well used in the support vector machines to handle this non-linearly separable cases. In those cases, these kernel functions, they perform the implicitly, it is not explicitly transformed, but it implicitly transforms to the higher dimensional feature space, and there the inner product operation is performed there. Okay, that is what is going to be there. Now the question is that there are commonly used kernel functions are the linear kernel. This is nothing but it's also a valid kernel, the polynomial kernel, and the Gaussian kernel. It's also called as the radial basis kernel. These are the commonly used kernel function which satisfies the Mercer theorem. So these functions are used in place of this inner product operations. That is what is performed here. Okay, so importantly here, in case of the polynomial kernel, this A and B, they are the user-defined multiplicative and additive parameters that is used for this. And similarly, in the Gaussian kernel, the sigma, what you consider here, is a parameter associated with that. Okay, so that is what is the situation. Just to give an illustration for you. So now, if you really look into this here, if you really look into the data of the two classes here, this is the region of separation between them is a nonlinear surface, right? Now, when I use this Gaussian kernel, okay, so when I applied this support vector machine, this is a highly nonlinearly separable classes here. Okay, when I use this here, so in that transformed space, I do not know what is transformed space. So in that space, it tries to build the linear separating hyperplane. Okay, so but when you internally, when it's seen in the input space, it is equivalent to the nonlinear boundary it is learning. Okay, implicitly it is learning the nonlinear boundary. If you observe this obtained nonlinear boundary, it is exactly in the middle of the region of separation between these two classes, and all the circular black circles what you are seeing over here, they are nothing but the support vectors that is associated with that. Okay, that's important thing to be observed here. Is that clear for you? Okay, and just before winding up now, so we know that the support vector machine is a two-class classification problem. It always builds the classification between tries to learn the linear discriminant function between the region of separation between the two classes. Okay, but in reality, we know that number of classes in our data set will be more than 2. That's what we call a multi-class pattern classification. How do the support vector machine handles this multi-class classification problem? Basically, the multi-class classification problem in the SVM is decomposed into the multiple two-class classification problem. There are two approaches are there. One is one against rest approach, and there is the one against one approach. In the one against rest approach, is SVM is built for every class, considering that particular class as a positive class, and then rest of the examples as a negative class. Like this, SVM is built for every pair of class. Suppose there are 4 number of classes are there, so then 4 SVMs are built by considering that class as a positive and the rest of the class is a negative. And then when a test example is passed, it is passed through all the 4 C number of classes, okay, and then we get the discriminant function, and then using the which SVM is given the maximum discriminant value, so that is been decided as a that class label. Okay, that means the winner takes all strategy is used for this. Okay, similarly the another, if you really look into this, so you can see that in these 4 class cases, so this is this class 1 against the rest, class 2 against the rest, class 3 against the rest, and class 4 against the rest is being built. And then when we combine all together, it gives the region of separation between the multiple classes. That's the one. The second strategy is the 1 against rest approach. So here for every pair of classes, for here an SVM is built between every pair of classes. Suppose we are having the C number of classes, then the total number of SVM to be built will be equal to the C into C minus 1 by 2. That is C choose 2 number of SVMs has to be built. And then when a test example is passed to each of the SVM, pairwise SVMs, so we need to see that, look into their decision, and then whichever the majority number of voting scheme will be used in order to make a decision to which class it has to be applied. Okay, so just to, in this particular case, if you really see that between class 1 and class 2 is SVM is built, class 2, class 3, class 1, class 4, class 2, class 3, 2, 4, 3, 6, because in totally 4 classes, it is NC, the 4C2, that is a total 6 number of SVMs has been built, and finally they are combined based on the voting scheme. Okay, so these are the 2 approaches, but in practically, so both the approaches we're going to give you the similar results, not much differences. Anyone can use any one of the approaches here. Okay, now just a last before the last slide, if you see that there are several standard tools for this SVMs are available. If you really look into SVM Torch, LibSVM, LibLite, LibLinear, and in the scikit-learn it comes with an SVM, and all of them internally they uses one of these techniques, either 1 against rest or 1 against 1 approach to handle this multi-class classification cases. Okay, the references are given along with that. Okay, so just to summarize what we see in as an SVM as a powerful classifier, which is a linear 2-class classification problem. Basically, it tries to construct the maximum margin separating hyperplane. This is nothing but optimal separating hyperplane. Okay, here we define the margin as the minimum distance of any examples to from the hyperplane. Okay, so in order to handle the non-linearly separable classes, SVM uses the kernel methods where it tries to implicit using the kernel trick. It tries to map the data onto the higher dimension feature space where it assumes that data is linearly separable and uses this find this optimal linear separating hyperplane. Okay, and for the multi-class classification cases, it uses the 1 against rest and 1 against 1 approaches. Okay, and these are some of the list of textbooks. So I will give this lecture material to the organizers. They may share it with you. So most of the techniques and all these things which I have discussed are taken from these textbooks. Okay. All right. Okay. So this I conclude my session. Now I'm open to all the questions which you have. Okay. So sorry, I took 5-10 minutes extra. Yeah.
It's fine, sir.
Yeah.
So, audience, if you have any question, can please ask. So, one participant has asked, does transformation in higher dimensions separates the signal from noise?
No, it doesn't guarantee that it signals from the noise. It doesn't do any such things. But yeah, in some sense, outliers will become more separated actually. We can't guaranteely say that it separates the signals from the noise. Okay, but basically what it tries to do is that try to Yeah, I think let me just rephrase it. No, it doesn't. Okay, so let me just reconstruct this. Okay, so it depends on what context you are talking about. If I take the task as a outlier detection, okay, in that particular case, the signal is your actual data, and the noise is the one which is what is that? It is something like abnormal cases in your data, which is specific concept in SVM. That is what is called as one class SVM. Okay, there it tries to build the hypersphere around the data in the higher dimensional feature space. Okay, on the normal data itself, such that it separates the abnormal data. If you look into that particular concept from that side, it is some extent it separates the signals from the noise, but not for these two-class classification cases. Okay, in the two-class classification cases, it considers the two classes are separate in that way. But the transformation is not guaranteed to be the case. Separates these signals and the noise. Okay, it puts them in a more data of the two classes in a more separable cases. But still, some of the examples will be outliers will be there. There still has to be considered as a linearly non-separable cases and has to be okay. Hope you got the answer, or still you have the doubt.
Another question is, can we use PCA analysis for pattern of different kind of protein in a group of animals? This Mohsin is the person who has asked the question.
PCA can be used for
PCA analysis for pattern of different kind of protein in a group of animals. I'm not clear about the question. Mohsin, you can please ask the professor. You can unmute your mic. You can ask the question.
Yeah.
Mohsin, am I audible? This is Dr. O.P. Verma.
Yes.
Mohsin, you can ask the director to professor, Dr. Dilip. No problem. Just unmute your mic and ask the question. Mohsin, is it audible?
No, I'm not able to hear from the participant.
Okay,
but still, okay, I understood the question. So what he's asking is that, if I'm correct, so he's asking to, can we use the PCA for the reducing the dimension for identifying the classes, different, I think, is a protein or genes of the different animals, I think, right? So yes, you can use it, but again, you should remember that the PCA is just a representation, your transformation of the representation you are doing it, okay? And this reduced representations still can be used for the better representing your data, okay? So that's what I told in the last slide in the PCA, that once you transform the data, you get the representation of the PCA, it can be used for any task like your classification task. Even in your case, it is the protein classification cases, okay, and or the clustering or regression tasks. Okay, hope you get the answer. You can raise. You can write. Yeah. Okay, so any other questions or anything? So I'm just stopping the presentation now. Yep.
Sir, so it was a nice presentation. Nice to have you at MIPS 2020.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, but one thing I'll just apologize that, okay, this is this concept can be further very detailed. We could have gone much detail if we would have much more timings. Okay, So with the restricted time, I don't know how much I could reach for all of you. But only thing is that with whatever the things you understood, if you go back and read, so it will lot of doubts can be cleared. And also this materials I can share it with Karan so that you can get this material also.
Surely.
You can mail to me if you have any further doubts or anything cases. Okay.
Okay, sir. So, and shall we begin with the valedictory ceremony?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dilip, for joining us, for giving a
Okay,
wonderful
thank you.
lecture. Well, okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
So, can we proceed further,
Yes, sir.
Dr. Karan?
Yes.
Okay.
So, dear participants, dear speakers.
Huh.
So this is we are concluding the final session of MIPS 2020. So the course was entitled as Modeling and Identification of Physiological Systems, and we hope that we have done some justice to the title. It began with Modeling and Identification of Dynamical Systems by Professor Amit Patra. So where he explained various parameter estimation algorithms like recursive least square, then ARMA model. Also, he showed the applications of those identification techniques to ankle stiffness and then the cardiovascular system. And then the second session of the first day was by Dr. Tanmay Pal, modeling and analysis of respiratory system. So after that, Dr. Pahuja discussed physiological control system and its application to feto-maternal monitoring. And then Dr. Nikhil discussed about physiological control systems with special emphasis on arterial blood pressure control. Dr. Pant from IIT Roorkee discussed particle swarm optimization, differential evolution, these two things, and also gave an overview of taxonomy of optimization problems. Then fundamentals of deep learning were covered by Dr. Arnav. Then I myself gave a talk on identification of cardiovascular system. Today we had two talks on machine learning. First one by Dr. Ghosh, biologically motivated machine learning techniques for physiological systems, and recently and just now Dr. Dilip gave a talk on PCA based feature reduction and then SVM based classification. So there is a lot of scope in the modeling and identification of physiological systems. We try to touch some aspects of this. We hope that in near future also, and that like every year we keep conducting such courses. We thank the audience for their active participation. Now I would like to request Dr. O.P. Verma to take over.
Thank you, Dr. Karan, for inviting me and for such a very good event organizing. So now we are going to conclude now this time to vote of thanks to all the organizers and all the participants and all the guys who are involved, directly involved or indirectly involved in the session. Okay. So a very good morning to a very good afternoon to all of you. This is Dr. O.P. Verma from Department of IC. I once again warmly welcome to all of you in the valedictory session of the NIPS 2020. Okay. So honorable chief guest is here, Dr. Dilip Bedi, and present excellencies, all the participants and my dear colleagues. I thank to my organizing team, department and the institute for giving me the opportunity to express my gratitude on the special session of the valedictory MIPS 2020. On behalf of my department, IC, and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar IIT Jalandhar, I express my heartfelt thanks to my all the expert speaker. I would like to thank all the respected participants who have blessed us with their presence. I would like to thank my lovable, my favorite, my guru, the head of department, Singla, organizing member Dr. Karan and Dr. Ravi, and all the other faculty members, especially Dr. Nagla and Dr. Pahuja, for their unconditional support and their moral support. And I also thankful to all the non-teaching staff for their support. I would also like to thank our TCube cell for the funding to organize such an event. Without you, this team would not have been possible. Thank you very much once again, TCube. I also thank to all the family members of our organizing team for their moral and mental support. Finally, I extend my most sincere thanks to Almighty God for making this 2020 a resounding success. With His blessing and grace, we are able to make this event what it was. Thanks again for making this ESTC a successful and motivated us to organize such more events in the future. Thank you very much, Dr. Karan. Take the session, please.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes.
So anyone, any participant, please share. You can unmute your mic and share your views, so that we can enhance our series in future.
Good evening, sir.
Anyone want to share? Yes.
Sir, good evening, sir. This is Praveen from NIT Jalandhar, final year IC.
Okay, Praveen.
Sir, actually, it's been a very great pleasure to join the sessions for all these days, sir, because it has added a lot of learning to our previous learned courses in the NITJ itself. And I really thank Dr. O.P. Verma sir, Karan Jain sir, Pahuja sir, and everyone who has organized and been a part of it, sir. Thank you so much for organizing, sir.
Okay, thank you, Prince.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Anyone?
We will share all the PPT of the expert. Don't worry about that.
We shall share the presentation recordings. Just give us 2 to 3 days. We shall just compile and we shall send you all. Is that okay, Dr. Verma?
Yes. No problem.
By Sunday or Monday, I think by Monday we shall try to share positively.
Yes.
Thank you so much, sir.
Anyone who want to come?
Okay, then let's conclude the session, sir.
Thank you all. Whatever the things you have learned, please utilize
Dr.
it.
Pahuja?
Dr. Pahuja? Hello?
I think he's
Okay.
not
Hello,
able to
Karan.
follow.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir, please. Yes, sir.
Please
Please.
say a few words on this.
I would like to congratulate the team of Karan, Poppy, Ravi, the HOD. You have really managed a very good course, and it is required. It is much awaited course. So in a biomedical, so whatever when we have to start our work, so first of all we should do the mathematical modeling also, and then we should validate the result. And then we should go for some, you can say, ethical clearance, and then we should start our work, actual work. So, this is the best time they have conducted a very good course, and they have covered basically all, you can say, physiological systems with the help of the simulation. So many problems we can solve with the help of a simulation. So we can diagnose, we can simulate. So it's a big achievement for our department. They have conducted the course, and once again I would like to congratulate the team, the effort they have made for this particular course. Keep it up. Next time we will do the live course in our department also. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. Yes. So, Dr. Dilip, you want to say something?
I just saying that to all the participants that, so yeah, now you got all the, there's a momentum is there. You have got into the lot of different techniques and everything. So please don't stop it here. So work on them, and any help and anything needed or anything we can write back to us. Okay. So the continuous reading and working on this is very much important. That will be the once you work on it and then you get the better knowledge, right? So that is the great success of this workshop is concerned with. So yeah, that's what my views I just wanted to share with you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dilip. So can we wrap up here, Dr. Jan?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks to all of the participants and all the speakers and all the joiners. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.